Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the WoAS podcast. WoAS stands for Waiting on a Song. This podcast title is based on the infamous Dan Auerbach album. We like it. We want to strive to be the best songwriters we can be. So we figured let's pick a title that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But going forward, we will refer to this podcast as the WoAS podcast. I am joined by my host, Jeremy Dillon, also known as Jay Dillon, frontman of the Light Cycles out of Denver, Colorado. And I'm your host, Mike Ledoux, of musical acts such as Mike Ledoux. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today, Jeremy?
I'm doing well, man. Doing
Awesome.
well. Or
Great.
I should say good. I know I said well to try to be really proper, but I'm doing good.
Yeah, this is rock and roll. You're doing good, man.
I'm doing good, man.
Yeah.
Let me just chill out. Yeah, you're drinking the right thing. I've got water in my mug. It's not quite as rock and roll.
Well, yeah, I'll be clear. What makes whatever I'm sipping right now, which is Mama Juana, but instead of being infused with rum, it's infused with tequila, which I highly recommend. But not too much of it during a live podcast. To make it a little less rock and roll, I started with some tea to kind of wake myself up because I had to, sort of wait for.
Was it hot tea?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Okay, that's super old man. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. That's not rock and roll at all.
A good strong English black tea.
Yeah, nice chamomile.
Yeah. Oh God, definitely not. No, this is I need all 6 firing. So yeah, so it's water, Mama Juana, and tea, just so we're clear. I don't condone that for anyone listening or watching, but anyway. So on today's episode, which would be episode number 1, Jeremy and I are looking to break down the concept of striving for originality in one's own performance in the context of a song. And it was inspired by a clip that Jeremy came across by none other than the famous Geddy Lee of Rush. And I think he does a very nice job of breaking down what a lot of us think of and strive for as being an original artist or act. So let's check out the clip.
Speaking of originality, the name of our podcast, I guess, is an original.
That's an important point. But, eventually, if we just keep using the acronym, hopefully, that'll go over everyone's head. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the clip from this account that I don't even follow. Sorry, wise musician.
But we will after this.
Yeah, we'll just go ahead and give him a follow.
There you go.
There we go. So let's.
So many influences that you can't
let's just reload.
Sure. Yeah.
Fair enough. Pro here.
Originality is when you have so many influences that you can't tell them anymore. You can't see them anymore. They've all melded. And as your confidence rises in your craft, your personality steps in front of those influences, and that forms your voice. What's originality? Well,
so I think that's a cool clip from Geddy.
Yeah.
I think most people, whenever they think of Rush, they would say, oh, Rush is a super original band. Nobody really sounds like Rush. They've got Geddy Lee, with his really high-pitched vocals. You've got Neil Peart on the drums, doing crazy stuff. And they got a lot of prog rock things going on with the guitar. And like all of their really big hits later on are super original Rush things that no one else does. But
for sure,
whenever they started their first album, they have this great song called Working Man. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I sure am.
I love that song.
Up 7, I'm gonna work.
But that song is like straight up Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Like and their early stuff, they're really going for that like more familiar kind of rock sound. And I think it's interesting to watch bands do these things over time, and eventually we think of them as their own thing, but they all kind of start somewhere and they're showing their influences all the way around. And I think people have to understand, like, when you're starting out, you're not going to be super original, just like Geddy's saying, and you have to find your voice, and it's going to take time. And I personally am still feel like I'm working through that in my own songwriting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's noble to try to bring something completely unique to the table. But I think what I'm finding at this point in my life is that trying to fight too hard to be overly, unique and original winds up taking away from your creative process. And I think outside of something where you write a riff and you go, oh, that sounds exactly like Spoon Man or something.
Right.
Like, okay, well then you maybe want to like rework that or cut it out entirely. But outside of that, it should probably be that you get out of your head and your soul and whatever else, what you're feeling in that moment, and then audit it after the fact. At this point in the conversation, this is the conundrum one finds themselves in, but I bring it up because it's always been important to me, probably even from the first time I picked up a guitar to write something of my own, after I was learning a few cover songs and, just playing all my heroes' music.
Yeah.
It was important to be like, oh, I got to be original and I don't want to sound like X, Y, and Z. But here's the question. Is that even possible up until a certain point? Is what Geddy Lee saying that once you put your personality in front of those influences and you have like a certain amount of hours under the belt that are maybe not perfecting the sound of those influences, but getting them all under your umbrella and as part of your sound, is it only then when you get comfortable with that you start to become, original?
Yeah, I think there are people out there that can jump in from day one and sound completely original. Those are probably like the genius level people that got famous at like 18 or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And there are those people out there. I'm definitely not that person. And I think a lot of successful musicians aren't that genius level talent in that way. I'm thinking of some like really good bands that started off sounding like other people, Rush for one, or like I know there's a story about Coldplay, their big song Yellow. That was like a huge song when I was a young teenager.
Yeah.
And that song apparently started off as a Neil Young impersonation that Chris Martin was doing in the studio.
Okay.
His like high pitched, kind of weird falsetto voice. And it turned into that hit song Yellow, which is kind of interesting.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, really bizarre. But he doesn't really sing like that on a lot of his other songs, like the inflection he uses and the way he kind of sounds out the vowels.
No, not
like
at all.
what they do later.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why, as he was doing an impersonation.
That's crazy. Well, okay, so a couple that I promise I won't go off the rails with this, but a couple thoughts on that.
Let's go off the rails.
Okay. I'm really gonna go all in on this. So I have feelings about the direction that Coldplay's gone over the last, like decade. But that first album, oh my God. I mean, what a Herculean debut. I've never heard anything like that. And I didn't expect that. I remember not liking Yellow. I love Yellow now, but at the time when it came out, I was like, I just felt it was kind of basic. It's not, but at the time, again,
I mean, it kind of is, and it isn't. It has some basic elements.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe like arrangement wise it is, but it's very powerful. But what really hooked me with them was Trouble. Oh my God. I heard that and I was like, what is this? It was so dreamy and bittersweet and just really sort of dripping with emotion.
A lot of reverb on that album.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But what it is also, I don't know if you would agree with this, it's like jazz. I mean, there's a lot of AAA or ABA or whatever, that kind of structure where like he'll repeat the first verse in the end, and it's totally fine because the music's so damn good. You're like, I didn't even need different lyrics the third time around,
Yeah.
In my opinion. But it's, I think, original and creative, and it does a lot of things that a group that earlier in their career wouldn't do, as far as offering a bunch of different like textures and emotions and shades and not sounding repetitive. It's just like really a well done album. It's recorded well. So I'll just say that about it. Would never have occurred to me that it sounds like anything else. However, knowing that he and they are big U2 fans, I'm getting that right? I'm not making that up. I feel like stuff later on, I hear, maybe the next album, Rush of Blood to the Head or X and Y. And then I think maybe like, oh, like I could see where the U2 was an influence, and it almost cropped up maybe later in a couple songs. There's probably something on Parachutes I'm forgetting. Maybe that sounds like U2, but I may also just be thinking of the usage of the sonic character of the guitar or the way they, hit their choruses. But so there's a band where like, I don't know what they were going for. And I almost wonder if it was just like they were brand new to the world, that they had been like maybe playing live a lot or something. And they just really like were well practiced. And then they just knocked out a bunch of material. I mean, because I also wonder if it's a matter of this originality factor coming out, let's say in the form of like recordings. I wonder if sometimes we love the Beatles and we love these other bands, but then they go and they put out, like a debut album where it just sounds like its own thing. Like maybe like the first Kings of Leon album,
right?
Which is like very like boogie, like swinging rock and roll stuff. And I wonder if all these people being put in a room, like that just takes over. And then this whole conscious mindset of we have to be anything just gets completely shattered. And then it's just the gooey center on the inside just goes, and takes over. I mean, I certainly can attest to having moments of inspiration where I'm in the situation and I start putting together something that when I was trying to hack it out consciously and sound a certain way, I didn't achieve it then, but then I do in the context. But I wonder if like that's part of it too, is that experienced or not, playing a lot of cover songs or trying to mimic aspects of things you like in music, if that, as well as being put in the right situation, just creates this like unique character that you wouldn't otherwise hear. Or, I don't know.
I think part of it could be being in a band, right? You're going to, if you're in a band situation and there's not just like one guy who's written all the songs and all the parts, like a CCR kind of band, but it's like a real band where people have input.
Yeah.
I love CCR, by the way. So
Me too. Yeah.
I'm not.
No, I know what you mean though. That's for sure John Fogerty's band.
Yeah. That's John Fogerty's whole idea. And
of course
he was writing all the parts to all the instruments.
Right.
But if you have a real band, like I mean, at some point, if you're having everyone give input, you're going to come up with a unique sound just because you have 3, 4, 5 unique voices all together.
Right.
And it's like inevitable that you mix all those ingredients together, you're going to get this new concoction.
Yeah. And just even when it's as simple as one of those people, let's just say it's even one person, your bass player just comes up with some crazy ass counter melody that like you would never in a million years use, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what was that now? Okay, let's explore that. Whatever,
that's the B section now, let's make it into something.
So it's a good thing to be open to others' input when you're collaborating, and there may be starting to take in a direction you didn't intend, as long as it doesn't completely pull away from the core of what you're going for in your song theme or melodic theme. But for sure, maybe just adding more than 2 people together in the mix creates some of that originality, where maybe it's even something where the composition itself becomes the thing that defines the originality component. Maybe that's a big part of it too. At some point you write something accidentally, let's call it, it's an accident, happy accident. That's where the sound comes from. And then you start to chase that genre you just created. Because I wonder with Rush, to go back to the example of the first album and like Working Man specifically, they always kind of were leading towards this like wackadoo storytelling. And I wonder if Neil Peart wasn't as instrumental yet, pun intended, from a lyrical point of view and thematic point of view. And not, I'm not saying
like, let the libertarian creep in yet.
Yeah. And I'm not saying like, like Geddy Lee writes remedial stuff, and not at all, but meaning maybe they were just kind of like, all right, what's the guitarist's name? I don't know. I can't.
Alex Lifeson.
Yes. That's right. Okay. So I wonder if Alex and Geddy were just going to be, like, let's, write some rock tunes. We'll figure it out and play along. And then a little bit later, Neil steps in and is like, hey, check out these lyrics. And then, because there's this whole thing. This is interesting. There's that documentary Beyond the Lighted Stage. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't. I haven't seen that one.
Okay, it's good.
We'll Rush?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's about Rush.
Okay,
put the link in the description. I think it's from. This is another. Oh, we should get him on the podcast. There's this guy Sam Dunn who has done like that I know of 4 really good documentaries. 1 of 4 I haven't seen, but 3 I have. So this I think is one of them. I may be wrong. Maybe this is not him, but either way, you need to watch this and then anything else Sam does. But if you ever remember on VH1, they did Heavy, the History of Metal. I don't know if that rings a bell, but it was like a let's call it like a 6 or 7 part series.
Man, we were showing our age talking about VH1 when it was like actually music related.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. No, I didn't even think about that. A long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah. But anyway, so they did this great series on. It was called History of the Heavy Metal, and it was based off of a movie that Sam Dunn did called Headbanger. I'm sorry, Heavy, the Headbanger's Journey, or something like that. I'll figure it out and put in the description. But at any rate, it did so well, and I guess VH1 took notice of it. They wanted to make a series out of it, and he's an anthropologist and a filmmaker. So he breaks down like all like properly the roots of like rock and metal and stuff. It's amazing. So everyone go check that out. But he also did this other one called Super Duper Alice Cooper, which is great. And I think and this other one called Flight 666, which is about Iron Maiden. But I think he did this one, Rush Beyond the Lighted Stage, and if not, I apologize to the director of the film. But at any rate, they go through Rush's whole career, and Geddy Lee is talking about, it may have been like 2112 or whatever, but when they were starting to take this shift into this other direction of being more of like a fantasy themed prog band,
right?
And they were touring with Kiss, and I think when they started touring with Kiss, it was the first album. So anyway,
that's a weird show, right? You see Rush and they like are so tight and kill it, and then you get Kiss. I will hate on Kiss a little bit.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm gonna make no comment in response to that, but what I'm gonna say is that they were very well rehearsed. So it wouldn't have been such a stretch for them to take someone like Rush on the road with them, in the sense that it was both performance type show for the audience. Kiss had a lot of theatrics, and here's the thing: is like, from what I understand anyway, they didn't like. I mean, they still don't. They don't like jam out. Ace may be taking liberties with what he's doing in the solos from song to song, but for the most part, it's kind of like a set format, which I think is like smart if you're playing as many shows as they do, or they were playing, whatever.
Well, you got to time the pyrotechnics and all that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it is a big stage show. Yeah. But so what I'm just saying is, in the time and place, I don't think that was such a weird choice for them, and like where they would have been outshined or anything like that. Like, in other words, they were playing with like Nugent and Black Sabbath and Aerosmith, I think, probably. Yeah. And all different, like very different bands.
They have like diehard fans. You could get like the Rolling Stones to open for Kiss, and Kiss fans wouldn't care, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. We should do an episode on them, because I used to be a huge fan.
Okay. I didn't mean to shit on them.
No. I'm not insulted. I'm just saying, I think sometimes they're overlooked and misunderstood from a songwriting point of view, because they're all like great singers, by the way. Well, I mean, like Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley are great singers, and they worked very well in that band. And I think it's part of why they were so successful, aside from the all the image and everything.
The marketing genius. They are definitely
yeah. And they also worked with, and we should in this podcast celebrate this, because it's part of the songwriting thing too. They've worked with like Desmond Child, Bryan Adams has written a couple songs for them, particularly on their Creatures of the Night album. But they would be a fun one to do an episode on, because I think there's some really interesting backstories to like how some of these songs came about, and so, and then when we figure out the whole copyright thing, we can like reference songs, and so we should
do a episode where it's like Kiss sucks, changed my mind.
You know what, that's great. You be like the Steven Crowder at the table. Yeah. And I'll be the person that I'll be different people walking up, and okay, done. There you go. That's the episode. Anyway, so they toured with them. And in addition to like the fact that they couldn't have been more different, Rush is a bunch of young kids that are like geeky. They weren't trying to hang out with groupies or do drugs or anything like that.
Yeah,
they were like
Canadian.
going back. Well, nice guys. That's it. Yeah, they were going back to the like hotel room and playing like Dungeons and Dragons. Not really, but something like that. They were like relaxing. And Kiss would be like, "What the fuck is wrong with you guys?" So anyway, they got really tight, and Kiss thought they were awesome. So like they had a really good rapport. So they became friends with them. And Geddy Lee is talking about this like whatever next album was, again, maybe 2112 or something like that, but wherever it started to go in that more mystical, almost like Ronnie James Dio direction.
Right.
And I love Dio too, but that's another conversation. And he's like, yeah, so I'm playing, like they had a demo done, and whatever song it was, let's just say it was Passage to Bangkok. It wasn't. I'm probably totally butchering this, but he's like, I just remember sitting in the car with Paul Stanley, like at his house, and he's like, sits there, listens to the whole song, long pause, and he's just like, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, because originality may also mean polarization.
Yeah, I was just about to say, maybe whenever you polarize like 25% of your fans, that's when you've really made it into like an original space.
Yeah, I mean, think of Radiohead from Pablo Honey to anything that came after it, probably. And but particularly Kid A, which is just like completely out in left field. Sonically and compared to whatever they were doing before. There's always like one-offs that aren't great examples where like someone just tries something, because it's also that thing where when you were nowadays this isn't as much of a problem depending on what kind of artist you are, but when you were like working for the label essentially to be like as commercially viable as you could, and there's like a trend happening, and your label's like, all right, well, we need you to try this new metal thing out. Metallica, Kiss doing I Was Made for Loving You, that song, or the Stones doing Miss You. I was actually just watching a video on this, and they made the argument that it's not disco, but which is like a great song. It's just, but it's different, and it's not like they stayed in that direction or that like changed them. So that was like all these, the people or groups I mentioned, dipping a toe in the pond at a particular point in time, or it just, we all interpreted it as like, oh, they're disco, and maybe that's not what they were doing, but but then there's periods where I think artists will either make an augmentation or take a chance and take like a hard right turn. And then that's what they sound like now. And then there's things where like group dynamics and different members influencing this, but take Van Halen starting with David Lee Roth and then having Sammy Hagar, AC/DC with Bon Scott and, Brian Johnson.
That one was seamless.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's
no, it did change. The band definitely changed.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was always them, but like there's definitely a different vibe and core feeling to the Bon Scott versus Brian Johnson, but they both like do the band justice. I mean,
they do
unquestionably, and I would even make the same argument for Iron Maiden at all, but the first album was first two albums, but particularly the first album, this guy Paul Di'Anno before Bruce Dickinson, they were super original with him, and then they were even more original with Dickinson. But then he's a good example, and we may not have talked about this, but it's on this heavy, the Story of Metal series, where they cover, like they call it Nawaba, new wave British heavy metal, like Judas Priest and like Diamond Head and all these like random bands. They cover Iron Maiden, and they were kind of like the tail endish of that apparently, and or that period in heavy metal. And Bruce Dickinson was watching the band play at a club with this other singer who was a good singer, but not Bruce Dickinson. And he said something like, oh, I saw that guy up there and I said I could do better than him. And he basically like approached the band and I think convinced them to go with him. But what was interesting that he said was, he was like, I don't know if he was commenting on like people's perception of his singing style, because he's very like operatic and like big and larger than life. But in the series, they were covering shock rock. So they were talking about Screaming Jay Hawkins and like Alice Cooper and all that stuff, and like how all that kind of begat itself. And Kiss was kind of included in that genre, that, and so Dickinson was talking about, but forget even before Screaming Jay Hawkins, he was talking about Arthur Brown. You familiar with him?
I'm not. Okay. I'm not as big a metalhead apparently as you. I didn't know you were so into it, man.
Yeah, sort of. I don't love everything, but what I do love, I love. At any rate, Dickinson is talking about Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown is this guy who, another link I'll put in the description, who there's this song called Fire, and it's referenced as one of like the first or early shock rock songs. And it's just very sort of like avant-garde, but like spooky. And I mean, it's kind of like hokey by today's standards, but it's a good song, and he's a great artist. And he's very like very much a very big larger than life type of singer. Just some skinny, tall dude from England, but was part of like the, swinging 60s scene. Anyway, so a very unlikely sort of like character to wind up receiving that kind of title. But anyway, he was popular enough that Bruce Dickinson said he was out and about in London one night, right around or before he was an Iron Maiden, and he ran into me. He was like, I totally like probably freaked this guy out, but he's like, oh, I love you, man. Like, you don't understand. Like, my whole act is you, right? So so it turns out that like, and it's weird because if you listen and check out, you listen like 2 Arthur Brown songs from like the early 60s, like late 60s. And then you go listen to like 3 Iron Maiden songs. You're like, oh man, he does sound like Arthur Brown, like to some degree. He's totally his own thing. So here's a guy that
start
like
somewhere, man.
Yeah, but like also here's a guy who a lot of people hold in high regard, myself included, and is a great singer, but literally called himself out and was just like, I'm ripping off Arthur Brown.
Yeah.
And like, again, if you hear it through the thread of a lot of the Iron Maiden stuff, it sounds like that consistently. You're just like, holy shit. But it totally works, and it's totally its own thing. The Beatles still reaching back to their roots and trying to sound like a Jerry Lee Lewis or a Chuck Berry. There's
man,
that.
all the people that we think are super original, they all started off ripping off somebody. Every single one of them. Yeah. You can find some sort of thread there. I mean, I can think of like 3 or 4 off the top of my head. I'm thinking of this Dave Grohl video I just saw recently, where he's talking about his drumming style, just ripping off like disco stuff.
Oh yeah, like his his
big flams.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking about you mentioned the Beatles. Come Together. They had to like completely redo the entire vibe of that song because it was just a Chuck Berry song.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, and we can talk about Led Zeppelin ripping off
God,
all the great blues artists and Jeff Beck and all these people on their first couple albums.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, like times. Yeah, to the degree where like they weren't even like close to crediting any of that hurts as a Zeppelin fan when you learn that. You're just like, oh man, but whatever. I mean, it's like it just all it does is just take away the arguing point if you're trying to argue against other people about like sampling or whatever, it's just like, all right, whatever, Zeppelin did it too, fine, we're all in the same, but it's like and even that I'm a lot less opinionated about how people create their music nowadays than I would have been when I was 25 or something. But yeah, Zeppelin's no exception. Oh, who did that too a lot too, and didn't really deny it. I think he would just kind of say like it was inspired by this, and that's cool. Richie Blackmore and Deep Purple. There's a song on this album in rock, and it's called Into the Fire. It's a great song, and it's not the same notation, but it's essentially the same kind of song as part of a King Crimson. And then like there's one he does when he's in Rainbow that is like Jimi Hendrix's Wind Cries Mary. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff like that where like Blackmore, I think, was just like very enamored with certain styles that were kind of like foreign to what he's such a great guitar player. Side note, if anyone has never checked out certainly Deep Purple, but especially Rainbow, because then that's where he really shines. Just like his precision and sound, his precision with his guitar and the sound that he got out of it and the way he played was like pretty damn unique. And in a way that like a lot of this virtuoso bullshit doesn't really touch upon. Like Yngwie Malmsteen's great, but the way Blackmore plays is not outdone by like flashiness and taking nothing away from Malmsteen, but just
but even Blackmore is ripping off Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, like in this one song in particular.
Yeah, this one song.
It's just
he doesn't do it all the time, and even Jimi Hendrix was ripping off other people. Like I heard this quote from Pete Townsend where whenever Jimi Hendrix showed up in England, people were telling him he's got to go see him because Jimi Hendrix is ripping off his entire act. Like,
oh yeah, like smashing the guitar and all that stuff.
Smashing the guitars, burning the guitars, taking his guitar, rubbing against the mic stand for crazy noises.
Right.
Like Pete Townsend was doing all that stuff.
That's true. Better. Yeah. And I mean, like the disclaimer, I don't want to be misunderstood here. We're not talking shit about any of these artists. We're just sort of
I'm saying
that.
Yeah, that's just how it all works.
I agree.
There's no such thing as being totally original,
which is
we're all everything's built on a foundation.
Yeah,
from the beginning of time, like we've all been influenced by something going all the way back.
Yeah. So then going back to your comment about some people are just geniuses, and certainly that's got to be true, but then you're like, well, are we just not sophisticated enough to hear what the actual mixture of influences are? Like I would raise the example of, well, I would certainly say Radiohead. Like I don't know who the hell they sound like a mixture of at all. Mm-hmm. Probably some obscure bands that I don't know, or maybe something like 80s new wave, like Echo and the Bunnymen or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. But Jeff Buckley, I don't know who he sound like other than maybe his dad. But anyone that say comes out of the gate portraying themselves as super unique, and we all kind of buy into that. It's like, do we just not see it? Are they, or is their personality so,
or they're borrowing small enough chunks that we can't
maybe it's
recognize
that too. Because like Prince, as brilliant a musician as he was, it's not like he wasn't. Oh, Little Richard, that's what I was trying to think of before the Beatles. Yeah. It's not like he wasn't channeling him and Hendrix,
right?
Quite directly, just in a different tiny purple wrapper.
Yeah, it's got the same Little Richard mustache,
rapping. Right? But I mean, it was like totally unique in every way. On the flip side,
yeah. So before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you,
sure,
like, do you think that a mainstream artist nowadays can really be original? Or do you think everything is so commercialized now that the only one I can think of that like was original, that kind of blew the lid off things is Billie Eilish, where she's got like some top 10 stuff that really sounds way different, than other stuff.
Yeah, no, I would use her as an example too, and I think yes, she's very much that, especially her style and at times jazz leaning flavor, and how like, wow, that's popular now. That's awesome,
Yeah. But even her, I can see some of the influences, like just in the singing style, that have evolved over time. There's this old video that I love on YouTube that I like to show people. If anybody wants to look it up, I think it's called like How to Hip Sing. And it's basically this girl who's pretty funny, making fun of like how people kind of over enunciate certain sounds and phrase things in weird ways. Definitely a must watch. But Billie Eilish has some of that for sure in there. So I mean, I think you can kind of trace where some of that stuff is coming from, but it's all kind of repurposed and repackaged in a unique way. And the fact that it got popular is the crazy part.
Yeah, and I think also nowadays, whatever that means, because it may mean something different every 5 years, but pop has kind of gone more the route of super duper melody first, where they almost put the arrangement burden and emphasis on the melody, such that you could just have just some crappy pad of chords in the background. It doesn't really matter. And I don't mean the song sounds bad. I just mean it almost doesn't matter what the instrumentation is, because it's so kind of focused on the anchor being the melody in a way where it's almost all you hear, which is fine. It's just like a different way of like,
it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
The vocals are way up front.
Yeah. But
you just get this kind of like atmospheric thing. Maybe you have some super filtered drums where all you getting is some low end or high end.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're doing all kinds of stuff.
But this is not the best example in the sense that it's not like pop, but it is masquerading as pop, and it's just one song, and there's several songs now, but one song on one album from one band who has like 25 albums already. This group King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I don't know if you heard of them. Okay, so they have this one. So so basically, for anyone who doesn't know them, they essentially do like every genre of music, and they've like cranked out like almost 30 albums. They're ridiculous.
They're the most prolific band I've ever seen.
They are like 25 Frank Zappas in one band. It's just crazy. But they have this one song called Catch and Smoke, and I'll put a link to that in the description. It's in the weirdest time signature, or time signatures plural. And they do that a lot in their song. They also do like microtonal stuff where like you're going in between tones, and like, it gets a little nutty. But this song Catch and Smoke is a great example of, could you write a pop song that is not weird like Peter Gabriel weird, but like weird where like you just can't follow it, but it doesn't matter because it's so damn good. That someone's still capable of doing something that awesome and unique it's hopeful. And to answer your question, like 100%, I think people that have been writing music for a while that are trying to sort of like create something unique probably tend to look at the landscape right now with a lens of a lot of things have been done and there's like simple stuff going on and there's not really even like a hunger or need for something different, but like we're more equipped now than ever, to create unique art. And I think that if it's not prevalent, it's great because then it just gives more opportunity to do exactly that,
Yeah.
So we'll end on that positive note,
Yeah.
But yeah.
There's lots of music to be made still.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and that's part of the fun of doing all this is trying to create something original, right? So
yep.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, that was a good conversation that really flew by. I had no idea we were at time when you said that. So good though, because we do need to time box this.
Yes.
So anyway, thank you to my co-host Jeremy Dillon, and this is Mike LeDoux, WOAS podcast, episode 1. Thank you for joining us. We'll be doing a lot more of these and hopefully having some fun and exciting guests. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.
See you, Mike.
See ya. Bye-bye. Did you enjoy that episode? Yes? Would you like to see and hear more? Please like and subscribe, and you'll automatically receive notifications when we publish new episodes. Thanks for watching and listening to the WOAS podcast.